The Global Fight League is officially going to be launching in 2025, and myself and many others have a lot of questions about how this league is going to operate and if they really can make a splash in the MMA world in 2025. There's been a lot of people talking on social media about this. There's been a lot of people making videos about this. I actually think that Luke Thomas gave a pretty good take in his video about the promotion. Although me and Luke Thomas haven't seen eye to eye over quite a few things in the past, I do actually quite strongly agree with many things that he did say, and he did have a lot of evidence-based predictions on how the GFL was going to operate. And in this video, I'll be honest, I probably am going to be talking about many of the same things, but I am going to start talking about what the GFL is. I'm going to be talking about the draft that they're doing, the team format, and the way that I understand it, because even to me, as someone whose like whole identity on YouTube is to cover MMA and also cover non-UFC promotions such as the PFL, the GFL is confusing me. So I'm going to be talking about that in a way that I'm hoping isn't going to confuse anybody, and then as well compare it to other promotions which have started up and failed, such as Eagle FC, and what looks to be a promotion that is struggling right now in the PFL with only selling 10,000 pay-per-views despite having Francis Ngannou on their card. So to talk about GFL, just going onto their website right now, they have been given millions of dollars in funding somehow. Now, I personally don't know where this is coming from. One championship was funded by Bahrain, and I believe that PFL is funded by Saudi Arabia. Not too sure where the funding has come from for the GFL, but they've got millions of dollars to play with and launch a pretty big, or what they hope to be, is going to be a pretty big MMA company. The way that it works is going to be a bit different, and this is where I personally am quite confused, and this is also where I kind of don't really love it, in the fact that what you're doing is you're taking MMA, which at the base of it is just two people fighting against each other in the cage, and you've made it a little bit more complicated. Whereas I personally love the UFC because the UFC just has a really good ranking system. They have a champion that has to defend the belt every now and then against ranked contenders. They've got a top 15, and it just makes sense. And I think Bellator was the same. Bellator had a top 10, they had a champion, it made sense. The PFL, they tried to do something different. Now, to be fair, it seems to be pretty successful, but once again, it is quite confusing for a lot of people, and even me, every now and then, gets quite confused by what the PFL is trying to run. And the GFL is doing something completely different. They're actually running a draft on January 24th, where leaders of a team are going to draft fighters from a pool of 400 athletes to represent the team, and then fight on the card. And then eventually someone is going to be the champion. The first fights are going to be in April of this year, so not that far away, but the draft is going to be on January 24th. I don't fully understand what they mean by the cities, but it sounds like the cities are going to be the teams, so they're going to draft, and then eventually they're going to fight against each other, and then there's going to be a finalist. They've got a point system just like the PFL, and then they're talking about athlete benefits here with that 50-50 revenue share, which I think is what a lot of fans that do feel like UFC athletes or just MMA athletes in general are underpaid are probably going to quite enjoy. But the problem here is, for this 50-50 revenue share to take place, Global Fight League is going to have to run at a relatively big profit if they are going to be paying these athletes what I assume is going to be a pretty sizable amount of money, because if you actually look at what they've got going on here, they have some pretty big names on the roster. Now, to be fair, a lot of them are quite old, a lot of them are former retired fighters, like Alexei Olenek, he's like nearly 50 years old, Andrei Arlovsky's nearly 50 years old, so is Verdun, Frank Mir's coming back after many years away, Junior Dos Santos is coming back after the Eagle FC run, which I'm going to talk about when I talk about promotions that have tried to do something similar and have fallen short. And then, of course, there's Rebellis de Spain, who just wasn't really good enough in the UFC, but he's looking good at Karate Combat. Alexander Gustafsson's a big name that they've got. They've got Da Un Jung, which is a pretty big name as well to have, I would think. They also have Gegard Mousasi, and in my opinion, this is their best signing that they've got, is Gegard Mousasi. I think that he is actually underrated in the talks of one of the greatest middleweights of all time, because he has found success in the UFC and at Bellator. Welterweight, Abubakar Nurmagomedov, good signing, I would say. And then, of course, they also do have down here Tyrone Woodley, who seems to be the guy that they're going to make the face of the promotion. They do have quite a few other prospects mixed in here as well. Alex Oliveira, former UFC fighter, of course. Anthony Pettis, former UFC fighter, owner of his own promotion, which is quite cool. A couple prospects thrown in here. Charles Rosa, the head coach of Daniel Marcos, who is 17-0 right now. They've got something going on. And they also managed to get Paige Van Zandt recently. She must be at a flyweight or strawweight. I don't know where she's going to fight. But anyway, they got Paige Van Zandt recently as well. So they have a roster of fighters that all in all is actually a pretty solid roster. But the problem is, if you're going to go toe-to-toe with the UFC, the way that I believe most fans view the UFC is the highest level. And personally, I've watched MMA for so long, and as I did say, my kind of identity on YouTube is actually covering promotions outside of the UFC. And I do have to somewhat disagree. I think that there are some guys out there like Saladin Parnassi that have pretty good arguments for being some of the best. But for the most part, the UFC definitely does have like 95% of the best athletes on the planet. And if you are going to go toe-to-toe with the UFC or toe-to-toe in MMA in general, you have to get over that hump of the majority of casual fans seeing UFC as the sport of MMA and seeing UFC as like the only height of MMA. And I don't know if they can really do that with guys that have already proven to have retired, and also guys, in the case of Rebellis de Spain, proven to have not been good enough to be in the UFC in the first place. So what you're selling is a product of fighters that aren't UFC level, which is a terminology I use all the time, and you're trying to sell it as a promotion that is as good as, or if not better, than the UFC or PFL. To talk about it more, a lot of people were confused, so they did a Q&A talking about what it's going to be. There's going to be 6 teams representing 6 cities around the world, which could be quite cool. GFL team is going to be 20 athletes across 10 weight divisions, with 2 athletes of each division, so that's going to be quite cool as well, I guess. Signed means the athlete is officially draft eligible, and this is where I do have some concern as well, as a lot of these guys are probably just signing on, and then if they're not drafted, does that just mean that they don't fight? I think that's a question that we need to have answered. What's the purpose of the draft? Like a team is going to have a pool of athletes, and the draft is the January 24th, which I mentioned before. And there's the roster again, just to talk about it. They actually do have, in my opinion, a pretty solid roster overall. Like, I do have a lot of interest personally in seeing Anthony Pettis come back, but I don't know if I can speak about that when it does come to the majority of casual MMA fans. Andy Hickey is a guy who I follow on Twitter. Shout out to him. He does cover a lot of MMA in general, but also especially in Europe. And the GFL, at the time of this tweet, have 101 fighters listed as part of their roster, and 55 of them are 35 plus years old, and 19 of them are in their 40s. Something way off with this promotion, he said, and I think that there is definitely some concern to be spoken of when you talk about the level of competition, really. I mean, there's going to be guys that are coming back that haven't fought for, 4 or 5 years, which is just going to be crazy to see when it does happen. And now, with just kind of the explanation of what GFL is, let's talk about a promotion that tried to rival the UFC and the PFL and failed. Now, of course, when Khabib Nurmagomedov retired from MMA, it was a pretty big deal. A lot of people wanted him to come back. Dana White was allegedly trying to get him to come back with lots and lots of money. But what happened was he decided to start up his own promotion. And he didn't really just start up his own promotion necessarily. He kind of acquired what was Guerrilla FC. And Eagle FC was the result of that. And Eagle FC is a somewhat solid regional promotion in Russia. But Khabib was going to try and make it a bit bigger, a bit more important. And they didn't really make it work. Now, to be fair, they did actually have some fun cards. I actually watched all of these cards live because I was very interested in them. And in hindsight, a couple of really good prospects were on these cards, like Roman Magomedaliev, Ramazan Kurmagomedov. Ultimately, fighters that I think a lot of very, very hardcore fighters, fans would know, but it didn't really work out. And then, of course, Kevin Lee fought against Diego Sanchez. They ended up being disappointed. Rizvan Kuniev is now going to be in the UFC, debuting, by the way, against Curtis Blades, which is insane. And Imbika Sanganai even fought on an Eagle FC card. Like, this is a pretty solid roster of fighters. I know I'm going through it very quickly, but I'm trying to make the video not too long, because I could talk about this for like 45 minutes. And then, of course, it ended up with Junior Dos Santos losing to Jorgen De Castro. And that was the end of it, really. And so they had former UFC fighters on there. They had big names like Kevin Lee. At the time, you've got to think about this. This is 2022. I think Kevin Lee was significantly more relevant in 2022 than he is in the big 2025. They had Kevin Lee. They had Diego Sanchez. Diego Sanchez's name was on there because he had that coach that was doing crazy stuff, I guess. Junior Dos Santos still had some buzz about him in 2022. And ultimately, it just failed. It just didn't work. And they have now gone back to being a regional promotion in Russia. And I'm not actually too sure if Khabib still owns the promotion or not. Yeah, I think he probably does. But now it really has just kind of gone back to not trying to be a global sensation and just gone back to being a regional show in Russia, building up prospects. And this is the kind of problem that I have with the GFL is you're instantly going out there and you're instantly trying to go head to head with the UFC, and I just don't know if it's going to work, because you've got to consider the fact that a lot of UFC fans, like a very, very, very large percentage of them, are what people would call a casual fan. And I personally don't like that saying, because a lot of people just use it out of context, I think, quite a lot. But a lot of people aren't just watching every single event. They're not watching every fight. They're not following Big Marcel and seeing what the announcements are. You know, they're not as into MMA as a lot of people are. And I feel like GFL MMA, you're relying on nearly every single one of those hardcore MMA fans to watch you, to make up the numbers, to make up the millions of dollars that you've managed to get in funding to make back, to pay these guys the 50% revenue that you've got. And we've seen it before. We saw Eagle FC come up. They tried to take over the big show, and it didn't work. It failed in the end. I don't actually know exactly why it failed, but it did fail in the end. And they've come back to being a regional show. Now, to talk about a big promotion, or what a lot of people would consider a big promotion, even me would consider PFL a big promotion, these guys are struggling to make money. The PFL, I don't know exactly how much money they're making or losing, but I know that one championship, it has revealed, has been losing money every single year that it's been around, and it's been losing millions of dollars every single year that it has been around. And in that case, they've just stopped doing MMA fights because they've just gone to be in a Muay Thai promotion, which seems to be working out for them. I don't personally consider one championship to be an MMA promotion anymore, because they really have stepped back from MMA. But to talk about the PFL signed Francis Ngannou, which you could argue, when they did it, was the biggest name in MMA at the time. Francis Ngannou, he was coming off his win over Cyril Gane. He was meant to fight he was meant to apparently fight John Jones. He was going into the negotiation room with the UFC. He was trying to get all this stuff. The UFC didn't want it. They were painting the UFC as the bad guy, and the PFL swooped in, said, "Hey Francis, we're going to give you all this money. You can do this, you can do that. You can be on our board of PFL Africa," which is going to be a new regional PFL thing that they're trying to do. And Ngannou was he was a big name. He fought Tyson Fury, close boxing match. And then who did he go on there against? Anthony Joshua, one of the biggest names as well in boxing right now, especially at the time as well. And eventually he come back. He come back to MMA. And he smoked Renan Ferreira in the first round, looked really good. The card was stacked. Ngannou got paid millions. Renan Ferreira got paid like 500 grand. Like, money was spent on this card. And it turns out that they only sold 10,000 pay-per-views on ESPN+. They had no television pay-per-view, but they were also on DAZN. So the ESPN+ was only the domestic number, and the way that I have interpreted this is they sold 10,000 pay-per-views in the United States. And considering the PFL's majority of their fan base probably only is in the United States, they probably didn't sell much more than 20,000 pay-per-views. And they had Francis Ngannou on the card. I don't know how these guys are planning on making money, but UFC has the ESPN deal. I mean, PFL has the ESPN Plus deal. PFL has the DAZN deal. Eagle FC, which I was talking about before, they had their own app. It was called FLX Cast. I don't know if it exists anymore, but you downloaded the app and you watched the fights live on the app. And so they didn't have a TV deal. You had to watch it through their app. Maybe the GFL is going to do it all through YouTube, but like, as someone who makes money on YouTube, you like to pay like to make millions of dollars on YouTube, like you will need to pull just unbelievable numbers that I don't think the GFL can do right now. These guys have built up all their hype. They've got 2,000 followers on Twitter. I mean, who are they going to pay to promote them? Maybe me, hopefully me. GFL, if you want to sponsor me, let me know. But yeah, I just don't know. I'm skeptical, you know. Like, I think that there is a reality where it does work out and they do become like a little bit smaller than the PFL. But this team thing, it's confusing. I don't even understand it that much. Genuinely, like where you've got cities, but then you've got guys that are from different areas of the world, like a Maslov and an Olenek from the same city in Russia. Is Verdum and JDS from the same city in Brazil? Are Felipe Lins and Roger Souza from the same city in Brazil? Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I just don't really understand what the city means. But yeah, I just don't know. You've taken MMA, you've made it more complicated than it needs to be. I'll cover the GFL again when they do the draft, or just before they do the draft if more things are announced. But yeah, I just don't know like where all the hype's coming from. It's so exciting seeing another promotion. But if you want my honest and personal opinion on how it's gonna work, I think if you're just gonna go toe to toe international against the PFL and the UFC, I think you're going to come up a little bit short. Like the way that I have seen a very underground still but beyond successful promotion work out in Octagon is they started, I believe, in the Czech Republic, but I could be wrong, and now they're starting to take over Europe a bit. They did that massive show in Germany where they sold over 50,000 tickets. So they started as a regional show and then expanded. And like a lot of these regional shows that aren't going toe to toe with the UFC are getting paid by UFC Fight Pass to put on the shows. So, you know, it's like, so they've got an income stream through UFC Fight Pass. Like GFL, if they're going head to head with the UFC, they're not going to sign a deal with UFC Fight Pass. So, I don't know, I've just got a lot of questions about this. I feel like this whole video was kind of all over the place with what I was saying, but I just wanted to get my opinion out there on what this is. I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't excited for it. I am excited for it. Like, part of me would love to just see Frank Mir fight Alexei Olenek. I mean, it just would be good. But at the end of the day, this is genuinely, just being completely honest, this is lower level MMA than what the UFC is offering. And the casual fan that you're trying to attract, they're going to look at this, they're going to be confused. I've got a lot of friends that are fans of MMA. No one's messaged me about this, asked me about it. When the PFL popped up, I was getting messages about it. I don't know, man. I feel like the GFL, if you need some promotion, I guess I can help a little bit, but I only really pull like a few hundred views at a video, so I can't really even help that much. I don't know, GFL, like what are you doing for your promotion? I guess they're just gonna have to try and advertise it on TV. If they've got millions of dollars, I don't know, maybe you could spend some of that on advertisement. It's a lot of questions and not a lot of answers. Let me know what you think in the comments below.